The airport was crowded. Travelers hurried with their luggage. Announcements echoed over the loudspeakers, and the smell of coffee and fast food filled the air. Among all this chaos, a young black boy walked calmly, carrying a small backpack. His shoes tapped lightly on the shiny floor, and he seemed unaware of the curious glances people gave him. But in a few seconds, his life would change in a way no one could have predicted. Without warning, a security officer spotted him from the corner of his eye. Something about the boy's calmness and the small bag he carried triggered an alarm. Within moments, 9 police dogs appeared, their sharp teeth visible as they growled lowly. Officers ran up, surrounding the boy from every side. People froze. Phones were raised to capture the scene. Whispers and gasps filled the terminal. The boy looked around. He noticed the dogs and officers quickly closing in. His heart raced, but he did not panic. He stopped walking, lifted his hands slowly, and tried to stay as calm as possible. Some travelers moved back, creating a small circle around him. The boy's eyes scanned the faces of the officers, trying to understand what was happening. He had never been in trouble before. He had never done anything wrong. Yet here he was, surrounded by 9 aggressive police dogs, as if he was the most dangerous person in the airport. "Step aside," one officer shouted, but the boy stayed still. He didn't want to make any sudden moves. The dogs growled, their eyes locked on him. Each officer was tense, gripping their leashes tightly. The boy's bag, small and worn out, seemed to hold more importance than it really did. People whispered among themselves. What did he do? Why are there so many dogs? Is he dangerous? The boy remembered his father telling him to stay calm in difficult situations. He took a deep breath. Slowly, he put the bag on the floor and stepped back. The security officers exchanged quick glances, their radios crackling with orders and questions. Backup had been called. More officers were arriving. The scene became more chaotic. Travelers filmed, curious and anxious, wondering what was happening. Meanwhile, the boy thought about his journey. He had been traveling to see his father in another city. It was supposed to be a normal trip, nothing exciting, nothing scary. And yet, in a few seconds, he had become the center of attention. The dogs barked, some leaping slightly on their leashes. Officers were tense, their fingers twitching near the triggers of their belts. Everyone in the terminal watched silently, holding their breath, waiting for the next move. And then, something unusual happened. The boy's calmness seemed to confuse the dogs. They growled, but they didn't attack. He stayed completely still, hands raised, eyes steady. The officers whispered to each other, unsure how to handle someone so calm under pressure. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. No one knew what would happen next. Would the officers think he was hiding something dangerous? Or would they realize it was a misunderstanding? The terminal seemed frozen in time. Phones captured the moment. Hearts raced, and every pair of eyes followed the boy. The crowd was silent, waiting for the explosion, the chaos, the shocking twist. But the boy only stood there, calm, steady, and determined not to panic. The airport had never seen anything like this before. And just as everyone was holding their breath, a loud bark echoed, and the officers whispered urgently into their radios. Something had happened that no one expected. The story was just beginning. The boy's calmness was unusual. Most people would panic, scream, or run, but not him. He stood there, hands slightly raised, eyes scanning the surrounding officers and dogs. The growls of the 9 police dogs filled the terminal like a low thunderstorm. Travelers stepped back, some clutching their phones, unsure whether to record or hide. The boy's small backpack rested on the shiny floor, looking innocent. But the security officers didn't see innocence. They saw suspicion. Officers whispered to each other, their voices tight with tension. "Is he alone?" one asked, eyes darting between the boy and the crowd. Another officer nodded, then called on the radio, asking for more backup. In a few minutes, additional security personnel would arrive, and the terminal would be filled with uniforms and barking dogs. The boy felt the weight of every stare, every judgment. He was only a kid traveling alone, but right now, he felt like a suspect in a crime he didn't commit. The dogs were trained to detect threats, and they circled him, noses twitching. One dog lunged slightly, causing a tense reaction from the officers. A few travelers gasped. One elderly woman whispered, "He looks so calm. Maybe he's not dangerous?" But no one spoke aloud. Everyone knew they had to wait and see. The boy's heartbeat was fast, yet his face showed only control. He remembered his father's words. "Stay calm, think clearly, and don't give fear a chance." Then one officer stepped closer, slowly, trying to examine the boy without triggering the dogs. "What's in the bag?" the officer asked sharply. The boy's voice was calm but firm. "It's just my school project." The officer's eyes narrowed, doubt flashing across his face. He motioned for the boy to kneel and open the bag, but the boy didn't move too quickly. He didn't want to provoke the dogs. The tension was rising like a storm. Every second felt stretched, heavy with anticipation. Crowds whispered, cameras clicked, and the loudspeakers in the terminal announced flights, almost drowned out by the barking. People began speculating. Some guessed the boy might be a thief. Others thought it would be a serious crime. But the boy didn't flinch. His calmness made the officers uneasy. One officer muttered, "Why isn't he scared? Most people would beg us or cry." The boy's steady composure seemed to challenge them, confusing the situation further. Then came a moment that froze everyone. A small child ran past the boy, heading toward the restroom, almost into the circle of officers and dogs. One of the dogs barked loudly, causing officers to tighten their grips. Panic almost erupted, but the boy stepped slightly forward, softly signaling the dog to stay back. It was as if he had a connection with the animals. The crowd watched in astonishment. People whispered, "How is he doing that?" Meanwhile, the officers on the radio were debating. "Check his ID. Run his bag through scanners," they said, their voices urgent. Backup was on the way, and tension in the terminal was at its peak. Travelers held their breath, waiting for a breakthrough or disaster. The boy's eyes shifted toward the security cameras above. He knew someone somewhere was watching. He knew that any wrong move could escalate the situation into chaos. And yet, he remained calm, composed, almost unnaturally steady for someone surrounded by 9 police dogs and dozens of armed officers. Every movement, every sound in the terminal seemed louder, sharper, more important. Then, just as an officer bent down to inspect the bag, the boy's hand moved slightly, as if to gently steady it. The dog stopped growling for a moment, sensing something unusual. A hush fell over the crowd. Everyone waited, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would change the way everyone in the terminal thought about this young boy. The tension had reached its breaking point, and the story was far from over. While the officers and dogs circled him, the boy's mind drifted back to the past. This wasn't his first time traveling alone, but it was his first time feeling truly judged by strangers. He remembered the long train rides, the small airport visits, and the excitement of seeing his father after months. This trip was supposed to be simple, a visit to his father in another city, nothing more, nothing less. He had packed carefully. His backpack held only essentials, a small notebook, some clothes, and a science project for school. It was a small experiment with harmless chemicals, sealed in clear containers. The boy remembered how proud he felt when his teacher praised his project. Never did he imagine that this innocent bag could make him the center of fear and suspicion. The memory of the airport last year flashed in his mind. A young boy, who looked a lot like him, had been stopped by security for carrying a small package. That boy had panicked, and the officers had overreacted. The story had made local news. Airport scare over innocent package. People had watched in shock as a harmless child was treated like a criminal. He had remembered that story well. He had promised himself, if something like that happened to him, he would stay calm, no matter what. Back in the present, he glanced around. 9 police dogs, barking and growling. Officers shouting orders. Travelers frozen with fear and curiosity. His calmness wasn't just bravery. It was strategy. He had learned that staying composed could sometimes make people doubt their assumptions. He knew that panic would only worsen the situation. He remembered his father's advice too. People will judge you before they know you, his father had said. Stay calm. Show them you are more than their fear. Those words echoed in his mind now. They gave him strength. Each second he stood there, calm and composed, was a small victory. He wasn't powerless. He had control over his actions, even if the officers and dogs seemed in control of the environment. The boy also thought about the crowd watching him. He knew that every person had a story, a fear, a bias, and he couldn't control that. All he could control was himself. Every step, every gesture mattered. He had to prove, without words, that he was not dangerous. That he was just a boy trying to travel safely, like any other child. Then, a small memory came to him. His teacher's words when he first explained his science project. Your project might seem small, but it can create curiosity and learning. That memory made him smile slightly, even under pressure. If only the officers knew, he thought, how harmless his bag really was. The boy realized something important. The tension around him was not just about the bag. It was about assumptions, fear, and judgment. He wasn't the problem. Their perception of him was. And if he could stay calm, maybe, just maybe, he could change that perception. The flashback ended as quickly as it came. The boy's eyes returned to the present. The dogs were still tense, the officers whispering and pointing. Yet, his calmness had already started to have an effect. One of the officers hesitated. Another glanced at the bag, unsure of what to do next. In that brief moment, the boy knew that how he handled the next seconds could either escalate the situation or defuse it. He wasn't just standing for himself. He was standing for every child who had ever been judged unfairly, every innocent person who had ever been assumed guilty. The airport terminal seemed to hold its breath. The story was no longer just about the bag. It was about control, courage, and the quiet power of staying composed in a world that often judged too quickly. And as the boy stood there, small but unshaken, everyone watching began to sense that there was more to this boy than they had assumed. Something unexpected was about to happen next, and it would shock everyone. The air in the terminal was thick with tension. The boy stood still, his backpack on the floor, his hands slightly raised. 9 police dogs circling like predators, growling, teeth showing, muscles tense. The officers whispered urgently into their radios, glancing at each other, unsure of the next step. Every traveler around them held their breath, some frozen, some recording, some inching slowly back. One officer stepped closer, carefully, eyes fixed on the boy. His voice was firm but cautious. Step forward slowly. Open the bag. The boy's calmness didn't falter. He nodded slightly, but he didn't move too quickly. One wrong move, one sudden gesture, and the dogs would react. The crowd held their breath. The boy's small frame seemed fragile under the massive circle of barking dogs and tense officers. A growl erupted from the largest dog. It lunged slightly, straining at its leash. The boy froze, instinctively raising a hand to show he meant no harm. The officer controlling the dog tightened the leash, whispering sharp words. Easy, boy, easy. The dog barked again, echoing to the terminal, making travelers flinch. The boy noticed a family nearby, clutching each other nervously. Their eyes were wide with fear, but he also saw curiosity. He realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone witnessing the moment. If he panicked, the crowd would panic. If he stayed calm, maybe he could calm the situation too. Slowly, he bent down and opened the bag, just enough to show its contents. Small containers, neatly packed, held his harmless science project. He lifted one up carefully. "It's just my project," he said softly, voice steady, almost whispering to the officers. For a moment, silence filled the air, broken only by the dog's low growls. An officer squinted at the bag, unsure. Another muttered into his radio, He might be telling the truth." The tension in the terminal did not ease, but curiosity replaced some of the fear. Travelers leaned forward slightly, whispering, could this really be harmless? Then the unexpected happened. One of the dogs, the largest and most aggressive, tilted its head. It growled less and sniffed the bag. The boy stayed still, making no sudden moves, holding his gaze calmly. The dog's growl softened and it stepped back slightly, confused. The officers exchanged quick glances. Something about the boy's calmness was affecting the dogs. But the moment of relief didn't last long. Another officer, unsure, motioned for the boy to kneel. The dogs barked sharply, reacting to the movement. The boy froze. He didn't want to escalate the situation. Slowly, he gestured with his hands, showing he understood instructions but didn't want the dogs to react. The crowd gasped again. Then, a small child ran past, almost entering the circle. One dog barked loudly, pulling on its leash. Travelers screamed slightly, and officers tightened grips on the leashes. The boy stepped forward just a little, signaling the dog to stay back. It was almost as if he had a silent understanding with the animals. The terminal fell silent, all replacing fear. Officers on the radio debated. Check his ID, run the bag through scanners. Their voices rushed uncertain. The boy's calmness was unusual, almost unnatural. It made the officers hesitate, question, and doubt. The tension had peaked. Every eye in the terminal was on the boy. Every heartbeat seemed louder. Travelers whispered among themselves. Who is this boy? How is he so calm? And the boy stood there, small but unshaken, a quiet force amid the chaos of barking dogs, tense officers, and frightened onlookers. And in that suspended moment, it was clear the next few seconds would decide everything. Would this situation escalate into disaster, or would his calmness save him? Everyone waited, holding their breath. The story was far from over. The boy stood still, his small hands raised slightly, his calmness like a shield against the chaos surrounding him. The crowd watched, hearts pounding, as officers whispered among themselves. 9 police dogs, their ears perked and tails stiff, circled cautiously. The boy's backpack lay open, revealing small containers neatly packed. One officer stepped closer and leaned down to inspect the bag more carefully. What is this? He asked, his voice sharp but uncertain. The boy answered calmly, It's my science project. Nothing dangerous. He lifted a small glass tube, showing the harmless chemicals inside. Some of the travelers leaned closer, whispering, Is it really nothing? Could this boy be telling the truth? The tension hung thick in the air. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered into the radio, He might be telling the truth. Check it properly before making a move. Another officer frowned, clearly unsure how to react. The boy stayed completely still, his calm demeanor almost hypnotic. Then a subtle shift happened. One of the dogs, the largest and most alert, sniffed the bag, growled softly, then stepped back. The boy did not move a muscle. Slowly, another officer peeked inside, scanning the contents. It's just a school project, he admitted, more to himself than anyone else. The tension in the air began to shift. The crowd, sensing the change, held their breath, waiting for the next move. Travelers whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. All this chaos for a small project? A woman muttered under her breath. Why didn't they check properly first? The boy's calmness had forced the officers to slow down, think clearly, and question their assumptions. But even as the misunderstanding became clear, not everyone relaxed. Some officers were still cautious, eyes scanning the boy in the crowd. They didn't know if the calmness was cleverness or innocence. One officer whispered to another, He's too calm, why isn't he scared? Most people would panic. The boy's quiet strength was making them uneasy in a way nothing else could. Then a travel supervisor arrived, a stern woman in uniform. She looked at the boy, then at the officers. What is happening here? She demanded. One officer explained quickly, Ma'am, he was stopped because of his bag. We thought. The supervisor interrupted, raising a hand. And now you see it's harmless? The officers nodded, a little embarrassed. The crowd began to murmur, some with relief, some with lingering curiosity. Phones were still recording, capturing every moment. The boy stayed calm, picking up his backpack slowly and straightening his jacket. His heart was racing, but he did not let it show. One of the younger officers approached him cautiously. Are you okay? He asked softly. The boy nodded. Yes, he replied, voice steady, though inside he felt a surge of relief. I'm fine. The dogs relaxed slightly, sensing the change in the officer's tension. The scene was slowly de-escalating, but the memory of fear still lingered in the crowd. Even though the misunderstanding was cleared, the impact was not over. Travelers whispered each other about the boy, about the calmness, and about how quickly assumptions had turned a normal situation into chaos. The boy realized that being calm, even under pressure, could change perceptions. He also understood the power of patience, composure, and courage in a world quick to judge. As he walked toward the terminal exit, officers stepping back, dogs on leashes, the boy's small figure moved confidently, carrying more than just his backpack. He carried dignity, strength, and a lesson for everyone who had witnessed the scene. But even as the situation calmed, one thing was clear. The story was far from over. Something unexpected was still waiting. Something that would shock everyone even more. The tension had eased, but the airport, the travelers, and the officers would not forget this day. And the boy, he was ready for what would come next. The boy had picked up his backpack and stood straight, trying to calm himself as officers slowly relaxed around him. Travelers began to murmur among themselves, relief replacing fear. The tension that had gripped the terminal for what felt like hours was easing. But just as people thought the ordeal was over, an unexpected twist changed everything. One of the officers glanced up at the security cameras and noticed something strange. "Check the CCTV," he whispered into his radio. Another officer quickly pulled up the footage, scanning the boy's path through the airport. Every step, every gesture he had made before the dogs surrounded him was recorded, replayed, analyzed. And then, the screen froze on a single frame. The boy, calm and confident, had prevented a potential accident. A bag had fallen from a traveler earlier, almost hitting a moving escalator. If it had fallen the wrong way, it could have caused panic or even injury. The boy, completely unaware of most of the surrounding chaos, had stepped forward at just the right moment, gently moving the bag and warning the nearby travelers with a quiet gesture. His calmness, so visible to everyone now, had prevented what could have been a dangerous accident. The officers' jaws dropped. The dogs, sensing the sudden change in the atmosphere, relaxed further. Travelers whispered in astonishment. Did he just prevent something dangerous? All this tension and he saved people? Even the stern supervisor stared at the screen, realization dawning. The boy wasn't just innocent. He had been quietly heroic. The largest dog, still on a leash, wagged its tail slightly as if acknowledging the boy's bravery. Officers slowly stepped back, murmuring apologies among themselves. One approached the boy cautiously. We were wrong," he said, voice soft. "You were helping." The boy simply nodded, not angry, not boastful, calm and steady. He simply accepted the acknowledgement. Travelers, many still filming, began to clap quietly. Some whispered words of praise. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The boy's quiet courage, his composure under intense pressure, had transformed fear into admiration. His small act, unnoticed at first, had made the entire airport safer without anyone realizing. The supervisor spoke to the officers. "This changes everything," she said. "The boy's calmness prevented an accident. We need to review how we approach situations like this." The officers nodded, a mix of embarrassment and awe on their faces. What had started as a misunderstanding had turned into a lesson about observation, judgment, and patience. The boy smiled faintly, picking up his backpack. His journey was far from over, but something had shifted. The world around him, for just a moment, saw more than assumptions, more than appearances. They saw the impact of courage, calmness, and careful action. As he walked toward the exit, the crowd slowly parted, some still filming, some whispering in admiration. The dogs were led away, leashes slack, their tension gone. Officers followed, still discussing the unexpected turn of events. The boy moved forward quietly, carrying more than his backpack. He carried respect, proof that calmness under pressure could change everything. And yet, even as the tension faded, one thought lingered in the minds of everyone watching. If a young boy could create such an impact by staying calm, what other assumptions had they made about people too quickly? The story was over for now, but the lesson remained. The airport returned to normal. Flights were announced. Travelers moved again, and life resumed its pace. But in the minds of the witnesses, the boy's quiet bravery left a mark. Something simple, unnoticed, and calm had turned a dangerous situation into a moment of shock, respect, and reflection. And just like that, the boy's small presence had made a big difference, forever changing the way everyone would look at fear, assumptions, and courage. The airport slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Travelers walked past, some glancing back at the boy, some still whispering about what had just happened. The loudspeaker announcements continued. Footsteps echoed on the polished floor, and the smell of coffee and fast food returned to normal. Yet, for everyone who had witnessed the scene, nothing would ever feel normal again. The boy adjusted his backpack, shoulders straight, eyes calm but alert. He had survived the intense scrutiny of 9 police dogs, dozens of officers, and a terminal full of curious travelers. More than that, he had maintained his composure, turned suspicion into admiration, and quietly prevented a potential accident that could have caused chaos. It was a lesson in courage, patience, and quiet strength, qualities most people overlooked in a moment of fear. Officers approached him one last time. Some offered apologies, others nods of respect. "We acted too quickly," one officer admitted softly. "You handled it better than we did." The boy simply nodded, his face showing neither pride nor resentment. Calmness had been his greatest weapon, and he had wielded it perfectly. The travelers, meanwhile, whispered among themselves. Did you see how calm he was? All that fear for nothing, and yet he saved everyone. I'll never forget this boy. Phones were still recording, capturing not just the misunderstanding but the quiet bravery of the boy who had stood unmoved while the world around him panicked. The boy's thoughts drifted to his father. He imagined telling him about the incident, about the dogs, the officers, and the strange tension that surrounded him. He imagined his father's pride, his father's words reminding him that calmness and patience often carried more power than fear or anger. He smiled faintly, knowing that the story he would tell his father would sound almost unbelievable, but every word was true. Even as the crowd dispersed, the lessons lingered. The airport staff would review their procedures, reconsider how they judge appearances, and think twice before reacting solely on fear. The boy's actions had reminded everyone that calmness, courage, and composure could not only prevent disaster, but also change minds. As he walked toward the terminal exit, the boy noticed travelers giving him space, some nodding quietly, others whispering words of admiration. For a moment, he felt the weight of their attention, but it did not unsettle him. Instead, it reminded him of the quiet power of his actions. What seemed like a small, simple act, staying calm, lifting a hand, opening a bag carefully, had created a ripple that touched dozens of lives. Once outside, he took a deep breath of fresh air. The noise of the airport faded behind him, replaced by the hum of the city. People rushed past on the streets, unaware of the lessons learned inside the terminal. But he didn't mind. He knew that the impact he had made, though unseen by most, had been real. And that was enough. The story of that tense day at the airport would be remembered by the witnesses, the officers, and the travelers who had held their breath. They would tell others about the boy who stood calm while chaos surrounded him, the boy who had been wrongly suspected, yet quietly proved his innocence and bravery. They would remember the lesson: never judge too quickly, and never underestimate the power of composure. And as the boy walked into the distance, carrying his backpack and his quiet strength, one thought lingered in the minds of those who had watched. Sometimes, courage is silent, strength is calm, and the bravest acts are the ones no one notices, until they change everything. The airport returned to normal, but the lesson remained. The boy's calm courage had not only prevented disaster, it had shocked, inspired, and reminded everyone that appearances can be deceiving and composure can be heroic.